How much time you spend with Time Survivors reveals a great irony in its structure. Despite a beautifully crude style and crunchy bullet heavening, there's diminishing returns on the fun here somewhere before the 10-hour mark. A slow burn meta progression system and runs that last twice as long as the decisions you make in them prevent it from being more than just a competent Vampire Survivors reskin. But there's a lot to be said about how good that reskin is. If you're willing to meet it on its terms, Time Survivors is a satisfying digital bubble wrap with a consistent aesthetic and unique theme, even though it never tries to be anything more than that. We're flipping through a history textbook. The usual bullet heaven mechanics of automated weapons, passive equipment, and hordes of enemies to grind into are all themed up after different historical epics. Play Abe Lincoln in the Dark Ages, or pit Cleopatra against the dinosaurs. There's not much in the way of narrative framing, there's a tongue-in-cheek history teachers were sorry vibe to just letting the game be a goofy kitchen sink of recognizable faces and cartoonish powers, like Oda Nobunaga's jetpack. It's a lighthearted magic school bus trip and an enjoyable one at that, and tying all these disparate eras together is a Game Boy Advance trying to do 3D art style. There's an effortlessly retro charm to the look, and it's matched by superb game feel. The sound effects for hitting enemies layers with a satisfying thunk, and the incoming experience gems whose pitch increase the more you absorb nail that incremental progression fantasy that this genre is known for. There's also variety at the world level. It's got a small list of 4 eras to visit, but spices them up mechanically in some interesting ways. The dinosaur era has frequent migration events and asteroids to avoid. The Ice Age earns its name with patches of slipperiness that accelerate you when you walk on them. And Egypt has an optional side-scroller variant that recontextualizes how you view the same enemies and stage hazards without your free movement. It's these surface-level thrills that Time Survivors gets right. It's a polished bullet heaven with a neat look and an unconventional theme. My first few hours with it were great, and if that's the threshold you have for the pocket change these things usually run you for, then it's an easy recommendation. Regrettably, if you try to treat the game as anything other than a short-term dopamine treadmill, you won't be rewarded. There's a depth layer missing here. This progression tree and its balance are a primary culprit. Just moving through the base version of each world and felling each boss demands a lot of investment here, and that investment is clumsy when you see all the redundancies. You have some cool purchases like ultimate weapons, sharing space with the same basic health and regeneration upgrades individually for every single character, which is both a bore and makes sampling the roster early on punishing. Your in-game weapon selection is also nothing you haven't seen before. Almost the entire armory is thinking of ways to re-theme Vampire Survivors classics like the Whip, Garlic, and Lightning Ring, rather than focusing on original weapons or mechanics. And of all the things I would have specifically avoided copying from Vampire Survivors, that final stretch of a run where your build is maxed out and you're just going through the motions is certainly one of them. Exacerbated here by lopsided experience gain and run duration that frequently has you finished with your build 9 to 10 minutes into a 20-minute run. It leaves a good chunk of your time spent just being the passive execution of decisions you've already made. It had me yearning for a turbo mode to discover that one actually does exist, but only speeds everything up and doesn't alter run duration at all. Time Survivors can be bumpy at times, but its fantastical borrowing of history and its well-executed bullet heaven fundies make it worthwhile regardless. Being able to play as famous zone control mage Nikola Tesla is a thrill all its own. The game's mechanical safety and boring progression won't earn it a chapter in this genre's history books, but they don't stop it from being a fun indoor recess, at least for a day or two.